Imagine you're a few months into dating someone new, where every connection feels effortless and light. You've just spent an incredible weekend together, the kind where the noise of the world fades out and you feel this delicious growing closeness. During those 48 hours, you might have shared a meal in a quiet corner of a romantic restaurant or spent a long morning watching the light move across the window, feeling a full body exhale. Monday arrives, and a subtle shift occurs in the way that your new paramour communicates from their office or during their commute. The texts become shorter and clipped, and the gaps between them grow longer. You notice the warmth that was present on Saturday has cooled off into something a bit more distant and reserved. Without a conscious decision, you feel your internal state begin to adjust to this new chilly temperature. Your body registers the change before your mind even has a chance to label it. You try to become lighter and funnier in your messages, carefully editing and re-editing so you don't seem too demanding or needy. And the peace that you felt during the weekend is replaced by a high-stakes performance designed to maintain this connection at any cost. The shift happens in the nervous system, a quiet recalibration of your personality to ensure you remain palatable to them. And you don't realize that your nervous system is running an old, familiar program without your permission. This is not a malfunction of your character or a sign that you are broken. This part of you is encountering an old, unfinished story that began a long time ago. That people you care about eventually slip away and abandon you. Because that actually happened at some point. To most people. Perhaps this part believes that if it can just get this specific person to stay, the original wound will finally close. By the end of this video, you will understand which parts of you are running these programs and why they believe they have to do that to keep you safe. My goal is to help you turn this unconscious pull into a conscious choice so that you can finally decide how you want to finish the story. I'm Lea Dawn, a trauma-informed relationship coach, and I help women and couples overcome conflict to create ease and empowerment in relationships. And today we are going to look closely at the mechanics of the mysterious effect of repetition compulsion. Sigmund Freud first coined this psychological dynamic in 1920, naming it repetition compulsion to describe how we are drawn towards recreating our most painful experiences. Attachment theory later expanded on this by suggesting that our early relationships create implicit blueprints for how we expect to be treated as adults. These templates are etched into our nervous systems and remain stable until we do something to update them. But why in the world would we feel compelled to repeat our painful past? Is it a form of self-harm or masochism? Actually, psychologists believe that there is a dual purpose to this dynamic, with an unexpected intelligence baked in. The first purpose is unconscious. In our relational environment, what is familiar is safe, even if it is actually not safe. Our young inner parts often mistake familiarity for safety because the body prioritizes what it recognizes over what is objectively healthy. It also naturally confirms stories and beliefs that we've had about ourselves since childhood, especially if they're negative. A predictable discomfort can feel less threatening than an unfamiliar form of safety, believe it or not. If a person grew up in a chaotic home environment with volatile parents, a calm, consistent, and grounded adult partner can feel boring or even suspicious and end up magnetizing toward a partner with more inconsistent moods. Or if someone had emotionally withdrawn and neglectful parents, a partner who is emotionally available and craves that closeness and depth may feel overwhelming or even threatening. Now, many people spend years in therapy narrating their wounds and identifying their attachment styles without seeing any change in their actual behavior or their relationship outcomes. You might have taken every online quiz and read every book on anxious attachment, And yet you still find yourself staring at your phone in a state of panic when a partner doesn't respond in a timely way. Insight alone rarely provides what's needed to break a cycle that has been repeating since childhood. Understanding your pattern intellectually often feels like reading a map of a fire while you are still standing inside the flames. It is one thing to know that you are in a burning building and quite another to find the exit when the smoke is choking out your lungs. You may have already tried the standard advice of just choose better or repeat affirmations about your self-worth. Maybe you've tried to self-regulate by putting your phone in another room, only to find your body vibrating with an anxiety that makes it impossible to focus. These solutions often fail because they treat the symptom rather than the source. They assume that if you just have enough information, you can just override the survival instincts of your body. Intellectual understanding is a different language than the one that your nervous system speaks when you don't feel secure. This repetition shows up in the smallest moments of our daily interactions, often disguised as patterns like anxiety or avoidance. You might notice it when a partner corrects your perspective on a minor detail in a way that feels supportive, but leaves your body feeling overruled. It appears when a partner checks their phone when you're trying to share something vulnerable or personal, and you feel their presence leave that moment. Your nervous system recognizes these cues and initiates a reaction or a defense before you have even processed the interaction. Standard psychology tells us what is happening, but it frames the repetition as a problem to be overcome. The second purpose, psychologists believe, is much deeper. We choose or magnetize towards situations or people that reenact our trauma so that we can generate a new outcome by mastering something. Whether it's mastering a new ability, a quality, or a belief, we hope to rewrite and bring closure to this story. This is the aspect that is the hero's journey. It gives us choice to ask ourselves, what if this repetition is the invitation to healing? Enter internal family systems. Internal family systems, or IFS, is a fast-growing therapy that allows us to look at this repetition as a system of parts with specific protective intentions. We might find a young wounded part called an exile carrying the original pain of being unseen, being abandoned, or marginalized by a caregiver. These disowned fragments of our psyche carry a heavy burden of childhood wounds that have never been allowed to heal. So we tuck them away into the basement of our psyche where they are waiting for a chance to come into the light. Other parts, called protectors, work tirelessly to ensure that this old pain never reaches the surface of our awareness and wakes up the exile. These parts can be strategic rather than self-destructive. They generally believe that by recreating the old dynamic one more time, they might finally generate the outcome that the wounded part has waited decades to experience. If they can just win over that emotionally distant partner, then the original parent's distance can finally be redeemed. Or if they fight back under criticism instead of crumpling in fear, they will be victorious over the trauma of never feeling enough. This behavior is reaching for healing, but it misses the mark to be actually effective. The body gravitates towards the familiar because predictable environments are easier to navigate. Your nervous system is not choosing to suffer, but it is choosing the suffering it already knows how to survive. But the good news is repetition compulsion functions as a signal that you have unfinished business waiting for your attention. Every time you find yourself inside a familiar dynamic, every time you ask yourself, how do I keep finding these people, or why does the same thing keep happening to me again and again? A part of you is asking for help to master something that once felt out of reach. It is an attempt to turn a passive experience of pain into an active experience of mastery. Let's look at two client scenarios where repetition compulsion emerged and led to choices for new outcomes. My client, Sarah, found herself cheated on in 3 consecutive long-term relationships, despite choosing men with very different personalities. The first was a high-powered executive, the second a creative artist, and the third a dependable accountant. On the surface, they seemed like a diverse group of partners, and there was no way she was going to repeat her mistakes. Yet there was one identical underlying emotional current. Each man possessed a subtle but pervasive withholding that Sarah's nervous system recognized as familiar. She would spend years pouring herself into earning their attention, recreating a childhood dynamic where love was inconsistent and had to be won as approval until she would eventually mess up. Her exile carried the wound of a father whose affection was a moving target, available only when she achieved something important. Sarah's manager protector ran a program of extreme hypervigilance, constantly scanning for signs of disconnection and working overtime to be the perfect partner. She would anticipate their needs before they were even spoken, believing that if she was just indispensable enough, she would finally be safe. This manager had a blind spot that caused her to choose partners who confirmed her deep-seated belief that love must be chaste and she isn't worthy of unconditional love. The moment of recognition came during a session where Sarah realized she was not just a victim of bad luck, but she was an active participant in an old experiment. She saw that she was attempting to earn unconditional approval from partners who were just incapable of offering it. This realization gave her a conscious choice for the first time in her adult life. She could stay in her current relationship and master the skill of setting boundaries and requiring counseling to heal the partner's avoidant attachment, or she could leave and orient towards a more consistent and emotionally available partner. Sarah chose to lovingly recognize her latest partner's limitations and let go of him, and eventually began a relationship with someone who was emotionally available and didn't require her to perform for unconditional love. In a different case, Marcus, who repeatedly entered relationships with partners who were in a state of constant crisis or addictive behavior, he functioned as a professional rescuer, the one who would pay the bills, handle the legal trouble, pay for rehab and medical interventions, and provide their emotional anchor. Every time, he would eventually collapse under the weight of responsibilities that were never his to carry alone. His worth had been measured since childhood by his ability to stabilize a chaotic household where his mother struggled with untreated mental illness. His manager-protector part ran a savior program that suggested he would only be safe from abandonment if he remained the hero. Marcus felt a magnetic pull towards people in crisis because they provided the only context where he knew how to feel valuable. In his latest relationship, he found himself once again staying up until 3 a.m. trying to talk his partner through a crisis that she'd kind of created on her own. He felt a familiar weight in his chest, the crushing pressure of needing to save someone who really didn't want to be saved. He realized his unfinished business was learning that he could be loved for exactly who he was rather than what he fixed for people. He saw that his hero part was actually a terrified little child trying to ensure that his world wasn't going to fall apart and that he was always important and needed. He faced the same fork in the road: leave the relationship or stay and master a new way of being. Marcus chose to stay, but mastered the difficult skill of remaining present without fixing. He began to practice the agonizing task of letting his partner experience her own repeated consequences while he sat with his own terror of being useless and cruelly ambivalent. By refusing to swoop in to save the day, he finished the business of proving that he could exist without being a savior. The relationship transformed because he stopped playing the role that he had been cast in for decades, and she finally took responsibility for her own well-being. Ironically, in saving himself instead, he saved both of them. Now, I've observed in my own life how certain patterns can persist even when we believe we become conscious of our own choices. While I was able to break some cycles of partner selection early on, there was one pattern I was still compelled to repeat, having my feelings marginalized and dismissed. Even partners who were capable of holding space for others would eventually begin to correct me whenever I expressed my frustration or sadness. They would tell me that I was being too sensitive, always negative, low frequency, or that I was misinterpreting the situation. This became a label that defined how they saw me, a way to put me in a box that felt safe for them because they were wildly uncomfortable with anything negative. This doesn't make them bad people, but this was also a pattern that they were repeating from childhood where they had encountered a lot of negativity. Because I live with chronic health conditions that cause significant physical pain, I often seek empathy simply to feel less alone in my experience. They warned me that thinking negatively would attract negative outcomes, a tactic that effectively silenced my needs. But when I was in pain, I was told I was vibrating at a low frequency or that my focus on the pain was making it worse. And actually, there's some truth to that. But feeling alone with my feelings was what made me feel the worst about it. And the more they tamped down my feelings and told me to see the bright side or be grateful for what I do have, the more complainy I got. My parts were shouting louder and louder just to be heard. Sometimes I felt like a ghost in my own living room, watched by someone who only wanted to see the version of me that was smiling. Weaponizing positivity is called spiritual bypassing. It's very common, especially in the consciousness field, and it leaves people isolated in their own suffering and feeling ashamed for suffering. I decided I would no longer participate in dynamics that required me to suppress my reality to maintain a partner's comfort. I did have to examine the balance of negativity I was bringing, and I have learned the ability to express my negative feelings in a vulnerable way that actually invites compassion rather than correction. But more importantly, I know how to express myself when I'm being invalidated, and I know how to walk away from a situation where this doesn't change no matter how gently I communicate the issue. This took a long time and a lot of practice and mistakes to master, and it required me to stop the unchecked negativity that was a hallmark of my early environment. I have learned to balance my positive and negative expressions, ensuring that I'm being honest without being too draining or destructive. I recognize that my path requires me to be more discerning from the start, and I chose to leave the environments to find partners who do not see my pain as a threat to their worldview or happiness. To close, recognizing yourself in these stories is not a sign of failure or your destiny. It's just evidence that part of you has been working overtime to protect you and finish what started a long time ago. I invite you to think about your last few significant relationships over the next 24 hours. Don't focus on the surface details like their jobs or their hobbies or their hair color, but rather on the emotional current they emit. Was it the feeling of being invisible? Was it the feeling of needing to be perfect or loved? That feeling is the thread that connects your present to your past. Ask yourself what this part of you was trying to finish in those relationships. Then ask yourself how you want to finish this business now. You might choose to stay and master new skills within your current dynamic, such as setting stronger boundaries or asking for what you need with clarity. Or you might choose to leave and make a different choice about who you allow into your inner circle and choose partners who don't trigger the old stories. These patterns are incredibly common, especially in relationships where both people deeply care, but don't yet understand the nervous system dynamics underneath the conflict. If this resonates, subscribe for more trauma-informed relationship education around conflict, emotional safety, and relational repair. I also occasionally offer private intensive sessions for couples feeling stuck in recurring conflict patterns from repetition compulsion. The information is below if you're interested. And now, just for a little shot of joy, here is a clip of my own floofy spirit animal being a little hobgoblin. To your healing.